Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our monthly webinar in collaboration with Early Steps. I'm trying to see if we went online already, and we are. I cannot believe this is going to be the beginning of the third year that we are doing virtual webinars. Rose, how are you? Good to have you.
I am great. How are you doing?
I am doing good. Did you have a good summer?
Yes, went too quick. Just like a lot of people, I'm sure, could say.
I know it always goes by so quick. So my name is Soren Richardson, and I am the PEN director. PEN stands for Parent Education Network, and we are the PTI here in the state of Florida. So before I give a short overview of FND. So as always, I have Rose with me. We have a wonderful guest speaker today, and she's going to be talking all about the Medwaiver. Rose is going to do the introduction shortly. I just wanted to mention that we have the storm coming, right? And our guest speaker is up in north of Florida. So we might be having some internet issues. It might hang for a few seconds, but hang in there with us as we are navigating these technical difficulties, if any. Also, we are going to be putting a small link that has all the resources of this webinar in the chat. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box here in Zoom and on Facebook Live, and we will get to those questions at the end of the presentation. If you want to connect with me, here is my QR code. Just scan it with your phone, and it will download my contact information on your phone, and you can share your with mine. So before I hand it over to Rose, I'm going to tell you a little bit about FND. We were funded in 1985 by a group of parents that has a child with disabilities that came together for mutual support, information, and resources. We are part funded by the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Health, and therefore all the services that we provide to families are always free of charge. We never charge for our services. And we provide services to families with children that has a disability or are at the risk of having a disability from birth up to age 22. What we do is we provide information, resources that are vetted from good sources, and we help parents understand the IEP, navigate special education here in Florida. Rose is going to get back to us shortly. We also, one of the things that makes FND really unique is that almost everybody that works here has a child with a disability. For instance, I have a son that lives with Down syndrome, and he went through the early steps program, and that's where I met Rose. And he is now 8 years old, is in school right now. So we are the PTI, like I said, the Parent Training Information Center, and there are 3 here in Florida because we are a big state, and all 3 of these PTIs are housed under FND, and we're broken down in region. So we have the northern part, which is Poppin, the west side of Florida, which is PSN, and we also have PEN, which serves 12 counties from the Key West up to the east side and going up here in Central Florida. We also have a sister project that is Family Star, and they provide services to children and young adults that have more medical complex needs or that have mental health challenges. And together we all form FND. Good afternoon, Scarlett. Welcome here.
Thank you.
So Rose was going to do the introduction. She has your bio. I don't have it. So we're going to wait for Rose to come back. But in the meantime, maybe we can do it at the end. Do you tell us something about yourself after something that we need to know since we don't have the bio on hand?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Scarlett Kibbey. I'm the founder of Special Needs Guidance Group. And my background is I was a waiver support coordinator for 11 years, which is where I gained all of my insight and knowledge and experience with the Florida Medicaid waiver and the agency who runs it, which is called Agency for Persons with Disabilities. So about 5 years ago, I was approached by several of the families I worked with who asked me if I would provide some resources to families who weren't on the waiver, and if I could maybe help them apply or go through the crisis process. So I started doing that and just kind of fell in love with it. It was all the good stuff, the parents and, you know, that interaction and getting to see the help that the waiver gave them without quite so much of the bureaucracy and the red tape. So it kind of, it filled all of my needs, and it took out most of the stuff that really wasn't the best about my job as a support coordinator. So fast forward 5 years and here I am with you guys.
That's wonderful, because it's very, very much needed to have that support. And you mentioned, you said it's so beautiful without the bureaucracy, because that's often it is a lot, you know, if you have a child with a disability. And you know, first if you go to early intervention and then the school and then APD, what is that? Medwaiver, what is that? Like, there is just so much to navigate and to understand as a parent that it can be overwhelming. Rose, welcome back.
Thank you. I apologize. There's a lot of technical difficulties going on all around the state of Florida. I'm trying to assist in the background. But glad to be here. One reason that I am so excited to have an expert speak to us on this topic is because participants, if you don't know, I am the mother of a child who has spina bifida and hydrocephalus, which is one of the diagnoses that is on the list that Scarlett provided for us as I sent out the invite. But what I also know is the waters are very muddied on understanding these systems and understanding the process. And so I think all of us have a why on why we want to help others, and a little bit of the bio that I didn't get to read. I could hear you, that I wanted to make sure you knew about Scarlett is, okay, she is the mother of 3 children, but it was when she was young that her experiences with her Uncle Fred, who has the diagnosis of an intellectual disability, really started to open her eyes. And she said that when he became an adult, he had been very independent, but then was given a diagnosis of leukemia, and everything changed overnight. Scarlett's mom and her aunt were faced with caring for him while he was unable to work and while he was undergoing chemotherapy. Her family had no plans in place for this, and they had to research for every resource available to help keep Uncle Fred safe and healthy. Thankfully, he was able to receive Medicaid waiver services in the state of Pennsylvania and Social Security and Medicaid. And now he is in remission, and with the help of the waiver, was able to live the life of his dreams on a farm with the care that he needs. So between that experience and her 11 years of working as a support coordinator for Medwaiver, Scarlett, along with someone who used to be in Early Steps, she's not with us today, but her name's Carrie, teamed up and have put together a lot of things to help us with this process. So she has learned that families need to plan for the future of their children with special needs, but finding help is difficult. Scarlett's experience coordinating services with multiple government agencies allows her to help families avoid a caregiving crisis and provide a secure and successful future for their children with disabilities through the Florida Medicaid Waiver Program. So I am so excited, Scarlett, to have you here. And, you know, we really basically want to find out what you can tell us about the Florida Medwaiver. So I'll hand it over to you. Audience, again, if you have questions, we really ask, try to hold them until the very end. We will use the chat box for questions, because a lot of your questions may get answered if you listen carefully throughout this. And I will be sending the resources later by email to everyone who participated.
Thank you, Rose. So I'm going to start I think the best way to start is to let you guys know, first off, who's eligible. And then I'll just kind of go step by step through it in the way that I guess it makes the most sense, or I've learned it makes the most sense for parents. So the Florida Medicaid waiver is run by APD, which stands for Agency for Persons with Disabilities. I will try very hard to keep my acronyms to a minimum or explain them, because I don't know most of all of them either. So the waiver is specifically designed for people with the following disabilities. And I have my little cheat sheet here so I don't forget anything. The first one, and this is actually pulled directly from the Medicaid waiver, the APD's website. The first is intellectual disability with a full-scale IQ of 70 or below. The second is autism spectrum disorder in the more severe forms. So that's usually level 2 or level 3. The second is spina bifida. The third is cerebral palsy. The fourth is Down syndrome. The fifth, which I didn't see on the website today, which is interesting, is actually Prader-Willi, which is less common. It's not listed on there, but I think it's one of the subcategories still. Then there is Phelan-McDermid, which is its own special category, because if someone is diagnosed with Phelan-McDermid, they get a get out of jail free card. And when they apply to the waiver, they don't go on the waiting list. They go directly onto the waiver and begin receiving services. So if anyone on here has a child with Phelan-McDermid or knows someone, please share that information. It's a lifesaver for them. And then the last category is called high risk, which is probably what most of you would qualify under. So the high risk category is its own miniature waiting list, and it serves people from ages 3 to 5 who do not necessarily have one of those listed diagnoses, but are at high risk for the development of one of those before age 5 or in that time frame. So for those people, they would apply at age 3, and they would just send all of the paperwork. And then when they turned 5, if a diagnosis of one of those disabilities had been made, then they would reach out to APD and let them know that there's now another diagnosis. And then that should place them from the pre-waiting list or the high-risk waiting list to the main waiting list. So then the next thing is probably the reason all of you will apply. I'll tell you what the waiver is and what it actually does for families. So the waiver is a federally and state funded program that when someone is accepted onto the actual waiver, not the waiting list, but the waiver, they will receive Medicaid. If they weren't eligible for it under Title 19, then they're made eligible under Title 21. So the first thing and the most important thing is getting on waiver allows someone to have Medicaid when they may not have been able to access Medicaid prior to that. And then the waiver itself would provide a support coordinator, which is basically a case manager, who would assist with the services that person is eligible for. The services range from something as small as consumable medical supplies all the way to group home placement or supported living as an adult. When someone is under the age of 21, Medicaid actually is the funding source for most of the services that they would be receiving. So Medicaid would cover all of the therapies, ABA, speech, OT, PT, and any other therapies that are Medicaid covered. Medicaid will also cover something called personal care services, or PCS, which provides care to the child with the disability in the home or in a PPEC center while the parent is at work, which is a huge, in fact, it allows some parents to be able to work. Without that service, they couldn't work. So that's a huge service. It also covers things like consumable medical supplies, nutritional supplements, durable medical equipment, pretty much everything except the case management. And then respite services would also be provided by the Agency for Persons with Disabilities under the waiver program. So then when someone turns 21, those services would change because Medicaid would no longer be the funder for this therapies, nursing if you needed it, personal care, consumables, durable medical equipment. It would just turn into insurance basically. And that's when the waiver really kicks in and makes a huge difference, or what I've seen is a huge difference, because it will cover all of those services into adulthood, and then it will change and grow with the person who's on the waiver. So when they turn 22 and they're no longer in the school system, but they still need, support and services, it would provide either a day program and transportation to and from, or it would provide care in the home so the parents can continue to work. As parents get older, I know most of you on here are probably younger, and your 40s seem so far away, but blink and they'll be here. It provides things like supported living coaching and personal support so that your child can live more independently without you. So it kind of fills that gap. For most parents, it's just kind of a peace of mind. And I know when our kids are little, we're not really thinking about those things, but time goes by really quickly and they get big fast. So where I see the biggest difference is when kids move into adulthood, the waiver services are just unparalleled. So then that's kind of the waiver and who's eligible and the timeframes and the ages. So then the next thing I probably should tell you is what age you can apply. You can first apply. So you cannot do an application and submit it to, well, you can, but don't waste your time until your child is age 3. So at age 3, you should do the application and send it into APD. The application is only 4 pages. There's a release form that goes with it. And then you'll need to send in, APD has listed a list of the documents they need. Most importantly, you'll want to send in every shred of documentation about the diagnosis, and not just about the diagnosis, but how it impacts your child and the care that they need. I think that's probably the most important thing to focus on when you're sending things in. And yes, Rose?
I'm apologize if you stated it, but I did see a question, and I know from myself as a family, I had learned when I had my child that being average income did not qualify us for a lot of things. So am I correct in that to apply for Medwaiver, it is based on the diagnosis, doesn't have anything to do with the income of the parents?
You are 100% correct. And it is, to my knowledge, one of the only long-term non-income based programs in the state of Florida. But I will add one little caveat because I have a close relationship with APD, and I don't want to misquote. When someone comes on the waiver and the Title 21 Medicaid is applied for, there is an income limit that is based on that person, the person with the disability. So they cannot have anything in a bank account over the $2,000 limit. And that wraps into having, most of the time they're a minor child. So even if they do have a savings or a small bank account, rolling that into an ABLE account or some sort of special needs trust is something I recommend all parents do, whether you're on any government assistance programs or not. So there is a little bit of an income contingency there, but it is not based on the family income. You are 100% correct. That's one of the biggest myths we have to dispel. And one of the reasons parents probably never even apply is because everyone, is denied Social Security, is denied Medicaid. Everything is income-based except this one. So thank you, Rose.
You're welcome.
I have one question on that in the same line. And I know we said to wait for the question at the end, but since we're talking about income, so is that also true for when they turn 21, 22? There is that income component, and is it their income or does the family income? So let's say the young adult still lives at home. How does that affect income?
So it holds true the whole way through. However, it's always based on that one person with the disability's income. However, again, that $2,000 limit in an unprotected bank account or asset still holds true. And again, that's when the ABLE accounts, ABLE United's phenomenal. The ABLE accounts or a private special needs trust come into play because it will allow that person to have excess of $2,000 for emergencies, for life, but it's protected. The government benefits are still protected, whether they have that or not, because it's within a protected trust. So it doesn't interfere with what the purpose of the government benefits are, which are, to provide, Social Security is housing and food and shelter, and then waiver is actual services. So it does hold true, but you still need to make sure they don't have just a basic bank account with more than $2,000 in it.
Does the income of the parents also play a role?
No. And, occasionally there are mistakes made when the Title 21 Medicaid is done, because, you're dealing with several government agencies. So APD knows what they're doing. Medicaid/DCF knows what they're doing, but there are several programs within the programs. So occasionally, there can be a mistake where Medicaid checks the wrong box and they assume it's for Title 19, not Title 21. So you have to be careful with that. But no, the family income never counts.
I just took notes that a future webinar we may do is on ABLE accounts.
Yes, and I probably have someone who would be phenomenal for it. We probably both know her. And then the Social Security aspect is a big deal too, because that's a certain age. When a child turns 18, they're considered an independent adult. So again, household income would not count when the child turns 18. And a lot of parents confuse, there's just a lot of confusion about the different ages and when you're eligible for this, and income-based and not income-based. But for waiver, you're eligible to apply at age 3. And, if your family is in crisis, you can get on the waiver at age 3. It's not unheard of. It's not very common, but it's not unheard of. And so just the big number to remember is age 3 forward, apply for waiver. So then I guess, another thing to talk about would probably be some of the myths around it. So one was the income. The next one, and probably this is probably the reason parents don't apply and don't, go through all of the paperwork and the process. There is a 23,000 waiting list, 23,000 person waiting list. And a lot of people assume that there's no way they're going to get on the waiver because there are 23,000 people ahead of them. I will tell you there are 7 categories within that waiting list that are prioritized. But that doesn't mean that in 10 years you magically, get your lottery ticket or anything like that. You really have to stay proactive and be contacting APD. Another reason, well, I guess adding to that, a lot of parents are told, well, it's 23,000 people and the only way to get on it is if you're in crisis. And then they assume that they're not in crisis because every day is usually a crisis. But APD does have a set of crisis criteria. There are 3. One is homelessness, which most people are not experiencing, thank goodness. The second is danger to self or others, which is behaviorally based. And then the third is caregiver unable to give care. All 3 of those categories have basically characteristics that go with it. So they can be very subjective. So it's not, the crisis process is not a straightforward process. And I will say that it's always worth it to contact your local APD and tell them your situation and say, would we meet crisis? If you really feel that you're in crisis, you should definitely apply and then reach out to them on a regular basis. Kind of the squeaky wheel gets the grease. But another thing that is not talked about is every few years, and I know this because I was a support coordinator, I started 15 years ago. So I've seen multiple rounds of these, I like to call them lottery letters. Every few years when they get extra funding, they try to pull people from the waiting list and they send out lottery letters. I don't know if there's supposed to be a rhyme or a reason. I haven't ever gotten a direct answer on that. And I don't like to question, if you're sending out these letters, thank you so much. But they're basically just acceptance letters. And over the years, I know at least 15 or 20 people who have gotten them. And some of these people were only on the waiting list for months. So it's definitely worth it to take the hour or so that it takes to fill out the application, to gather the documentation, scan everything, and send it to your APD. You might hit the lottery, or you might be in crisis at some point, and that would save you at least 90 days of waiting for the application to go through.
And I can assume that the lottery letters are being handed out to 21 years and older? No. And that's why I say I've never been able to figure out a rhyme or a reason. And I know I work with families all over the state. So I'll even get calls from someone who's on the waiver and they're like, my friend just got this letter. Is it real? What should they do? And so I always kind of take down the information of the age and, the living status, everything that's going on. And sometimes they're over 21 and they're families who are kind of in crisis. But I've had several that they've been young, like 12, 15. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's why I say I've never been able to ascertain like what the rhyme or reason is. Again, I'm not looking a gift horse in the mouth. Just happy. I'm happy for those families. When I do come across someone who calls me and says, I got this letter, the first thing I tell them is you should probably go play the lottery as well. because this is, you don't even know how lucky your lucky day is today. So, I mean, yes, there is a long waiting list, but there are always ways to get on it. And then the other big important thing, which is probably more wishful thinking on my part or hopeful thinking, is that if everyone who's actually eligible for these services applied and was on the waiting list, then our lawmakers would actually see how large the numbers are. I think the waiver right now serves 60 to 65,000 people, and then the waiting list has 23,000 on it. There are more people than that in the state of Florida who are eligible for these services and should be on the waiting list and on the waiver. So my big hope is to someday see the waiver fully funded. And I truly feel that the only way that will happen is if they see how great the need is. And that can only happen if everyone applies and is on that list. I would gather that the numbers are probably closer to 150,000 people who are in this state and are eligible. So, you know, that's my altruistic side.
But you're absolutely right. I know that the people that are making the laws and the rules and the regulations make those decisions based on data. And those of us parents, most of us don't have the time to go up there and state our cases. And so a very simple thing is, you know, if any of us have a child with the diagnosis that makes them eligible, is to do it, to apply. And then that helps them see the facts. There's a great need in this state.
Yeah. Carrie in a podcast we did stated it really beautifully. She said, you know, I want all these parents to do this for them and their child, because the waiver doesn't, yes, it does benefit your child directly, but the difference it makes for the whole family, for the parents, I mean, just the peace of mind knowing that you can pay for all the things your child actually needs medically and otherwise to keep them making progress and healthy and safe. That goes, I mean, that just lets parents sleep at night. But beyond that, when they get these supports and services, it saves marriages. It allows them to go to their other child's basketball game or soccer game. You know, it changes people's lives. It changes your child's life, but it really changes the whole family's life. And in turn, the whole community. You know, parents are able to work to their full potential. Just in general, it's such a necessary program. But so Carrie had said, you know, I want everyone to apply for themselves and for their child, but selfishly, you know, do it for others too. Because when you're applying for your child and you're becoming one of those numbers in that data, you are helping other parents, because the lawmakers will see the numbers. So that was Carrie's take on it that really kind of hit home with me. I was like, that's not selfish.
That's so true and beautifully said. One of the questions I have, and maybe you'll touch on it, or maybe, you know, you can explain later. So one of the things that we encounter as a PTI often are families that move here from out of state. And sometimes they have younger kids, but sometimes they have already young adult or adult kids. Yes, kids, children. When I say kids, so used to. How does that go about? So, you know, like the wait list is long, you're moving here. Are they going to get able to get services right away if they're, over 22? Can you shed some light on that aspect?
I can. So something that I learned in the last year and a half, which is interesting, I'm based out of Jacksonville, and we have a large military presence here. So we have a lot of military family who move here from all over. And something I learned about Florida that's interesting is that if someone is stationed here and they were living in another state and their child was receiving waiver services and they're in the military and they're now stationed here, they are supposed to automatically go on to the waiver. So they should apply and then let them know that they're active military status and that they were on the waiver, provides proof that they were on a waiver in another state, and they will be given admittance directly onto the waiver. That and Phelan McDermott are really the only times that happens. So and again, I was a support coordinator for years and had never heard of that until about a year and a half ago. So that's a big deal. But for those of us who are not military, being on a waiver in another state is definitely not a guarantee that you'll have any sort of preference. I will say that it's easier to get on through the crisis process after age 21 and 22 because there are no other funding sources. So the waiver is considered the payer of last resort. So they're only going to fund services that cannot be accessed through any other service or support. So like under age 21, the family's health insurance or Social Security and Medicaid. And then at age 22, they age out of the school system too. So once they've aged out of the school system, there's really nothing other than, the nonprofits who help and Social Security and Medicaid. And Medicaid doesn't cover actual services and supports in the home or out of the home at that point. But what I would recommend is that the family kind of investigate before they move here if possible. And, just kind of see where they are, what the situation is, and if maybe they would meet crisis criteria when they moved here. If there's no choice but to move, then I would apply for waiver as soon as you get here. After age 3, there's no age limit. It's never too late, basically. So you could be 50 and apply. I will say that the older someone is, the harder it can be to get their diagnostic records from early childhood. So while the disabilities have to have manifested prior to age 18, they didn't have to technically be diagnosed, but APD has to still see documentation that these limitations existed. If they weren't diagnosed, like someone who's in their 50s, who we might clearly see has autism right now, they were not diagnosed at age 5 with autism. It didn't even have a name. So while the statute says it must have manifested prior to age 18, APD really likes to see diagnostic materials from before age 18, just to prove that it was indeed present prior to age 18 and is indeed a developmental disability. And also on that note, something I would like to recommend to parents who are listening to this and thinking, oh, I should apply. When you send things in, don't send originals ever, 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 and send everything that really shows a clear picture of your child's needs and, their speech therapy, their OT, their PT, if they have ABA, hospital records. I mean, APD really wants to put everyone on the waiting list, but they want to make sure that it's the people who really need these services and they're not just handing out cards. So they're scrutinizing very heavily, especially the categories of intellectual disability and autism. They go to state office now. So if you apply with one of those boxes checked, it will go to state office and be scrutinized by their team of senior psychologists. But for most of the people who are on this call, you're probably going to be in that high risk category. And so you're just going to send everything. everything but the kitchen sink.
And so from what you've observed with the two diagnoses that you said are being sent to the state office, it's not really been cut and dried though on the levels. It's just
It
there's
is,
some
and
parents that have some questions on that, so I just kind of lump it together.
And again, I'm not APD. I do maintain a close relationship with them, and I know they're underworked, they're overworked.
Hang in with us. Scarlett is having a little
And
bit of,
underpaid. They're very understaffed. So did we cut out?
yes, but you're back
Okay.
on.
Okay. Those categories are they're growing categories. So I think that's why they're scrutinizing them more heavily. And they're really following the statute a lot more closely than they used to. Again, they have a limited amount of funding right now. So I don't fault APD. They're doing the best they can with what they have. And then this loops back to the lawmakers. You know, if they see the numbers don't lie. So then, you know, maybe they would fully fund the waiver, which would alleviate a crisis for all of us.
So I have a question for myself, and that's
Yes.
probably a question for our audience that's here. Probably 5 years from now, they're going to ask this question. So I applied for APD. I registered my child with APD when he was 3 years old. Like I said at the beginning, he lives with Down syndrome. So those is one of the eligibility categories. I do not know what I sent in. I don't believe I sent in OT, PT records. I think I even have to change my address because it's one of those things that I've done. And so what do you suggest, besides obviously changing my address now, because I moved last year? Do I need to go back and look at those documents that I sent in? Tell me what I need to do.
No, once determined eligible, the way that the statutes and rules read right now is once you're determined eligible, it's not supposed to be reviewed or looked at again. And Down syndrome is one of those check the boxes. It doesn't have a list of characteristics that have to go with it. So you probably sent in, I believe they call it a copy of the karyotype.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yes, that's one of the things they request. Yeah, they request that or medical documentation of it.
Right.
The reason intellectual disability and autism are being more scrutinized is because they have a list of characteristics and they're more spectrum-y. I mean, autism is a spectrum, but intellectual disability too, you know, as the IQ goes down, the functioning level goes down. So APD really they want to make sure the people who need the help are the ones who are getting the help. A side note that I'm starting to see that's a really important, and especially for the parents who are on here who haven't really entered the school system yet, the primary diagnoses and things on the IEPs are being taken heavily into consideration by other funding sources like the waiver. So when you send in your application, if your child is 10, they used to ask for one IEP. Now they're asking for every IEP from the beginning. And they want to see, so if you check the intellectual disabilities box, then they want to see that as a diagnosis on your IEP. And what I'm seeing is, you know, the schools really want to focus, everyone wants to focus on the positives where they can with their kids. But what I'm seeing is that's really hurting them when they get older and they need this help, because the IEPs especially are being painted in such a positive light that it can be used, you know, kind of against your child to make it seem like they don't need as much help. So that's a word of caution I would give to parents is I would make very, very certain that your child's IEP really reads to their disability and the help that they do need. I know everyone wants to see positive things, but your IEP is not the place for it. And that is a trend I'm seeing quite a bit with APD for sure.
And that is only true for the intellectual disability, but or also for like autism, other categories?
Mostly intellectual disability and autism, but even with the other categories, if there are language barriers, if there are other learning disabilities and disorders, they should all be listed on there, and it should just be an accurate portrayal of your child's functioning level, not rainbows and sunshine. I hate to say that, but I'm seeing it really used to the detriment of our kids and to deny funding for services. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's I was not aware of that. So wow.
I wasn't either until I started seeing the trend. Yes.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One person asked on that topic that Soren was asking, they wanted to know if it's any benefit to mark Down syndrome and intellectual disability.
That is actually an excellent question. If your child has any of the other categories other than intellectual disability and autism, I would mark that category as the primary, and then autism or intellectual disability as a secondary. And also, if your child is diagnosed with autism and intellectual disability, I would always anytime someone has one of the diagnoses and autism, make autism the secondary diagnosis. Simply because there are more hoops to jump through for it. I mean, there are hoops for the intellectual disability as well. But if they have another disability that's listed in there, make that the primary, and autism or intellectual disability the secondary, for sure. So excellent question.
That is really good. So we have about 9 minutes to go. Anything else that we really need to know before we jump into some other questions?
I don't think so. I think that was pretty comprehensive. You guys asked the things that I missed, so I think we covered everything. But I'm sure there are going to be other questions.
Yeah, there are.
I have on Facebook too.
Awesome.
You want to go ahead, and then I'll do the Facebook after you're done here.
Okay. Let's see. Once you get Medwaiver, do you have it indefinitely?
Yes. In fact, we might have just done a coffee chat on that, Carrie and I. You pretty much, unless someone moves out of the state, and even if they move from the state of Florida, they have a year, so 365 days to come back and reclaim their spot on the waiver. So short of committing Medicaid fraud, which I do not recommend anyone do, short of that, unless you voluntarily give up your waiver spot, it is for the life of the person who's on it.
You ready, Soren?
Yes. So somebody is asking, is there a lot of paperwork involved every month to get services with a Medicaid waiver? Do you have to submit lots of receipts like the old claim from System with Insurance?
No. So to apply, there is a list. There's a list. In fact, I can probably rattle them off right now. So obviously the application, and then the APD release form. But on top of that, you would need a copy of a birth certificate of the child, social security card, IEP, a parent's driver's license for proof of residency, or the child, if you have a school ID. They're asking for IDs for children now under age 18. I know a lot of parents don't have them. My kids under 16 don't have them. So then they would ask for either a utility bill or a parent's ID for proof of residency. And then the specific diagnostic material, which is specific to each disability. So most of those are medical diagnoses. So Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, spina bifida, Prader-Willi, Phelan-McDermott. Autism and intellectual disability have their, with intellectual disability, they want to see a full scale IQ score. They want to see a Vineland. And then with ASD, they have a list of different tests they like to see. But you do that once and then that's it. And there's no recertification for that. So no.
Is Medwaiver, if you have multiple, okay, sorry, I moved away from the question, but it was basically that on that crisis list, the child having more than one, does it qualify as a, I've lost the question, like a tier 3?
So we're, right now we're kind of talking about the eligibility just to be placed on the waiting list, and they are separate. Yeah, they are very separate. You can't do crisis and eligibility at the same time any longer. So you have to do the eligibility. So in this circumstance, you're really focusing on the diagnostics and that you're eligible for the waiver to begin with. Then when you get on the waiting list, then you can try to move through the crisis process, that is where, multiple health issues, multiple children in the home, all the factors that can make things a crisis. APD, I believe on our website, we have a link as well to the statutes for crisis criteria. But APD's website contains all of these things as well. They contain the application. They should contain the list of documents. And then you can you can search by your region and go to that homepage and figure out where to send it to. The other piece of advice I'll give everyone is don't mail anything. Scan and email everything. It's really important to have that paper trail. Really, really, really important. Even certified mail, from what I've seen and experienced, gets lost. And it doesn't matter if someone signed for it, good luck. So one big piece of advice is always scan and email everything.
So one other question that we have here is, this person is asking, so her child has mosaic Down syndrome, and she's getting very technical, 60% of blood cell lines with the extra chromosome and 40% without. Is that something that is being considered when applying?
Just the Down syndrome diagnosis would make them eligible. Now, if that brings on a lot of other health issues, that would factor into the crisis part of it. But for Down syndrome, it really truly is a check the box. It can be, very mild or very, very severely impact the child. And if it says Down syndrome, then
okay. And then somebody else was trying to put a comment, but they want me to show them the denial, but I cannot see the rest of the comments. I don't know what she's referring to, unless Scarlett, what she's referring to.
Well, there are a lot of denials being issued. A lot of parents are getting denial letters. What I would say to everyone is, if you've looked at the statutes, And you can see, and again, I believe we have the link on our website, so you can see the statutes, you can see the crisis statutes, but you can also see the statutes on the eligibility for each disability category. If you feel that your child was denied, sometimes it's just a matter of you didn't send in the right information. I would reach out to them. I wouldn't request a hearing. I don't usually recommend that. I usually recommend contacting them and trying to get someone on the phone and asking, hey, were they not eligible, or did we not send? Because they don't have a box that says we need more information per se. So they won't always reach out and say, could you
That's
send
good
us
to
this?
know.
Or right. So you may get denied just because you didn't send. I see that probably 50% of the denials I see are they just didn't send enough information. So if you can get someone on the phone and ask them specifically what tests, what information, what can I send, then just reapply. You can reapply a million times. I mean, I don't recommend it, but there's no limit to the times you can reapply. And the hearings they're brutal. If you can avoid a hearing, always avoid a hearing. Just reapply.
I see, I don't know if you had, I'm going through the chat here, and it says, since the level of support needed for ASD might change over time, do they need a new diagnosis? Because they currently have a level 2. Do they need to update that?
If it depends on the age. If you're on the high risk wait list, then yes, I would send in more. The thing that I'm seeing with the ASD diagnosis is, we have so many more interventions and kids are making so much progress that once someone was determined eligible, if they move through the crisis process 5 or 10 years later, they may not seem like they are as severe because their parents have done so much intervention. And in those instances, I would never have them look at the eligibility piece again. They can't really take someone off the waiting list, but there have been some movements legislatively to narrow the definitions and to potentially re-review eligibility. It's right now the statute does not read that way, but those things have come up, and I think they're specifically geared towards ASD. And it's kind of punitive to the parents who have gone above and beyond, because you start to see that gap broaden again in the late teens into the 20s with the level of help, and the independence. So they're not supposed to re-review, and I wouldn't send new information in unless you have to. If you're on the waiting list, hold your spot.
I wanted to mention, for those that get on the waiting list, I don't know if I imagine it depends upon which part, but this is, I don't know if it'll show. Let's see. It's just a little postcard.
It's showing right there.
There. It's just a little postcard that says, just a reminder, it's time to update your registration. So it's not like the formal looking letters that you get when you get accepted. So I just wanted to throw that out there because we get so much junk mail that you don't know for sure what they'll send it to you. I do have a person that I think I know the answer, but I want you, Scarlett, to say, do you think if the family is already on Medicaid, but that when the child turns 3, they should go ahead and apply for Medwaiver?
They should definitely get on that waiting list. Whether your child qualifies for Medicaid, because of Social Security or for whatever reason, still get on that waiting list. I mean, even if at age 21, when Medicaid stops paying for all the therapies, is when you need it, secure your spot now. Again, our kids get big fast. So that time will fly by, and the sooner you apply and get on it, the better off you are.
That is so true. I can remember like yesterday that my son was 3 years old, and I was so sad because we were aging out of early steps, and we're going to the big world, the scary world where everything gets complicated. And I'm like, oh my God, I got so much time. And he turns 8. And this year, when he was about to turn 8, my thought was not, oh, he's going to be 8. It's going to be, I have 10 more years till he is 18, and it starts, because that's age of majority. They gain all their legal rights, and that's when things gets more complicated.
Yes. And I will say, the only trend for sure I've seen with waiver is them tightening the limitations. So it's getting harder and harder to get on the waiting list. You know, it's not super easy now, but I don't foresee that getting easier.
Right.
So in 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 years, you know, it may come off the table completely. So I would say do it now and get it done. And then reach out to, I did see something in the chat, how often. I would have something in your calendar to reach out to APD once a year. They're supposed to send out letters to everyone who's on the waiting list, you know, asking their status for updates and things. Like you just said, your address has changed. So they may have sent you a letter and you don't know. I had a family very recently last week, who I've been working with for a couple years. We got a letter, and, you know, mom called and said, should I reply to this? It was about crisis status. And I said, yeah, you know, everyone's getting them. I don't know, but it can't hurt. We got a call the day after they received it asking about the crisis status. So, you know, even when I think they don't read all the letter, I mean, they can't possibly read all the letters. You might have that general revenue worker who does read every one of their letters and makes the calls. So reaching out to APD once a year to make sure you're on their radar and you're still on the waiting list. I've had horror stories about people who were removed from it when APD couldn't reach them. So yeah, keeping your information current with them, and then establishing a relationship with someone at your office, your regional office, is a really good idea. Yes, email's great, but if you can find someone who you connect with and then get their full name. So the other piece of advice is all of APD's email addresses are their first name dot last name at apdcares.org. So anytime you talk to someone, get their first and last name, and then send a follow-up email that says, I just wanted to go over our conversation and make sure I heard what you told me right. And then you have it in writing too. So
I just gonna call, I don't even know who my case manager is at this point, and I moved county, so I just call my county, my local office, and reconnect with somebody, right?
Yes. And if when in doubt, if you call and you can't get anyone, get on the website and start looking for your regional office, and they have everyone's positions and their email and their direct line phone numbers. When I can't get someone, I just work my way through the list until I get someone, or until they get sick of me. Pick up, right? Until they get sick of me, you know. Yeah.
Scarlett, did you tell us what day? Is there a certain day the coffee chats happen?
I think we post them on Mondays. But they're in our newsletter, and they're just between me and Carrie. But basically, anyone who's signed up for the newsletter, so Carrie sends out, and I take no credit for this. Carrie sends out a beautiful newsletter with the coffee chat. She posts the videos on YouTube. And then we send out other information. But if you're on the email list, you'll get all of those. And then you have access to them all the time.
And so it is time for us to start wrapping up. And I just want to make sure everyone who's listening knows that it'll be super simple to sign up for her newsletters or any of these resources, because the links will be in the email that I send to each of you. I can tell you that also Carrie, who has been referenced many a times, has started a new Instagram account just to highlight how the Florida Medwaiver has helped her family. And so these are great tools and resources that we as parents, we learn from each other. Scarlett, we're so grateful that you have taken the time and you have the heart to want to help families like ours, because as you know, any parent has a lot on their shoulders. And then when you take on extra challenges and extra systems, it can be overwhelming. So it really means the world to us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure. If I can make one parent's life a little bit easier, then that's the goal. So, but making a lot of parents' lives a little easier would be great.
That's amazing. And I just put in the chat here on Zoom and on Facebook, the S'more Flyer link. In there, you're going to get, if you scroll down the resources, you're going to be able to get straight to their website, the special needs guidance group, and also it takes you straight to the newsletter, so you can apply and register to get it. And all the great resources that Rose is going to send you is in here as well. So, I mean, we just want to make sure you don't miss the resources, right? And all the information. You get it from two sides. Scarlett, thank you so much. Like Rose said, we really appreciate you. We really appreciate all the information that you shared with us. This is for Early Steps families, but it's on our Facebook page, and it's just being shared with so many other families out there that, as you saw, they were putting questions and comments on the chat on Facebook. So I really, really appreciate your time, especially I know there is a storm coming and you got to be prepping. Thank you. Rose, thank you also for another wonderful kickoff for a new season of the collaboration between Early Steps Central Florida and Penn. And thank you everybody for tuning in, whether it's on Zoom or on Facebook Live, for spending this hour with us here. And we wish you a good rest of your day. Stay safe, and we will see you next month again. Have a good day.
Thank you again.
Thank you.